There are some days when you get out of bed and you see something and you say to yourself, "Good gosh, political correctness is hitting awfully close to my own personal life." A lot of times I sit here and I talk about things that have happened to other people. Well, generally, that's what I talk about. But every once in a while, I come across something and I just read it and I think, "Oh no, please." It's 8:07. Bill Colley with you this morning on Top Story on News Radio 1310, KLIX and newsradio1310.com. We're up to 40. I had some frost on the bumpkin this morning. Oh, no, that's a phrase from back when we lived in the hills. Frost on the windshield, actually. And some of the other things we have coming up this morning, just a very quick note. Someone very important has said that global warming is a hoax and that all of the climate change worries are just plainly outlandish, and yet the lefties can't do anything about it. We'll tell you who that is a little bit later in the program. Also, some more reaction, more fallout coming from that CNBC Republican debate the other night. We'll share some of those thoughts with you a bit later, too, as well. But first, I have some thoughts about political correctness today, and when I say it hits close to home, I came across this in National Review yesterday. Catherine Timpf, the writer, colleges designating official Halloween costume sensitivity consultants. Is my dress too long? No, it's nothing like that. It's far more sinister. Colleges are hanging flyers around campus with phone numbers of officials that students can call to consult with about whether or not their Halloween costume is perfectly politically correct. Quote, "Unsure if your costume might be offensive," unquote, asks a poster that's been hung around campus at the State University of New York at Geneseo. Quote, "Don't be afraid to ask questions," unquote. The poster contains the phone numbers and emails of get that, 5 campus officials that students can contact and discuss the very important issue of whether or not they will dress up as to get drunk and will be advertising or advancing social justice causes. Now, when I graduated there in May 11th, I believe it was, May 11th, 1984, the place was already well on its way to becoming the most politically correct campus, I thought, in America. I mean, and onerously so. It was also rated at the time as the biggest party school in the country. That was probably not a good designation to have as well. It was also, in fact, semester after I graduated, somebody told me that there was a guy called the Playboy Advisor. I guess he wrote essays for Playboy magazine. That's an interesting job, I guess. There were no pictures involved. He just wrote. Who knew? And he had given a speech on my campus the semester after I graduated, and I read this. Somebody carbon copied it. Well, back in those days, you put it on a Xerox machine, and they copied it. I was working in a large resort hotel, and they brought it in, one of my coworkers, and handed it to me and said, "Have you seen this?" So I started reading the thing, and the guy is writing about his trip to the campus, and he's student actually picked him up at the airport, and the student was driving him to campus where he was going to be giving a speech. Why? I don't know why the Playboy Advisor would be on a campus giving a speech. It's beyond me. And as I was reading the story, I recognized that the student he was talking to was a young woman named Carla Warren, who happened to be a friend of mine, who was also what I would call one of the more conservative people I ever met. And I was reading this conversation back and forth, and this guy concluded that the campus was not only the bawdiest, drunkest campus in America, but probably had, well, it's called hookup culture today, probably had the biggest hookup culture of any campus in America. Now, I had gone to school there, and I had no idea. Never, not that I noticed. And then I thought, and Carla wouldn't ever say these things. It's about 3 years later, I'm sitting at a restaurant in Buffalo, New York, and who walks in but Carla Warren? And by now, she was just finishing up law school at another university. And I looked up and was shocked to see her, and I said, "Hello." We started talking, and I said, this Playboy Advisor thing. And she said, "You know what?" She said, "I read it too." She said, "I have no idea why he put those words into my mouth, but that was the situation at the time." I had another friend, and she was probably one of the most straight-laced people you ever saw on that campus. And she happened to be walking home one night from what we called uptown. It was up the hill. We had to go up a hill. Campus sat on a hillside. And then if you went uphill, it was called uptown, and there were about, well, in any direction you turned and threw a rock, you had a 50-50 chance of actually hitting a bar. and there were a couple of submarine shops as well. And she happened to be walking home, and it a little dark night on a campus. You might want someone to be of assistance. And she ran into a buddy of mine who happened to have had a little bit too much to drink. But she said, "Hey, can you walk me home to the dorm?" And he said, "Sure, I have no problem with that." So they're walking down the hill and they're having a conversation, but he's getting more boisterous and louder as the whole thing goes on. And all of a sudden he says, "Hey, check this out." And he hauled off and he kicked over a trash can. About 15 feet away stood a campus police officer, and the campus police officer approached the two of them, wrote them both a citation. Now, my buddy managed to get through it all and had to do his penance, whatever it was he was supposed to do. And then, on the other hand, my friend Rosemary, who had nothing to do with this other than he was escorting her home, she got written up as well. And a few days later, somebody from the campus administration showed up at her door, with a knock, and she answered the door, and they told her that she was going to be facing some severe punishment as well. And she was annoyed, and she just said, "Well, you've got to do what you've got to do." And she closed the door in this person's face and thought, well, this is over with. The next thing she knows, she's called before a hearing, and the politically correct are telling her, if you say to someone, "You've got to do what you have to do," that is considered to be, well, first of all, it's not very grown up, and we need to have better behavior modification from our students. So that goes back 31 years ago. As I say, I've been away from that campus for a long, long time. I think I stopped there once to visit, driving through in 1998, and just walked around a little bit and thought, well, that's enough of that, and I happened to walk away. But it tells you that political correctness has been festering in this country for decades, and now it's seriously out of hand. Every once in a while, though, you will read a story, and it will tell you that somebody somewhere actually has defeated political correctness. These are rare victories, but they're sweet when they happen. There was a fellow by the name of Wesley Motor. He is a Protestant minister, and he was working in the U.S. Navy as a chaplain. He got fired as a chaplain because, as he puts it, some people didn't like his biblical message, and they didn't like his interpretation about families and marriage, sex outside of marriage, sex between same-sex people. All of these things were disturbing people in the U.S. Navy, where he was stationed in San Diego. So the Navy booted him out because they don't want any, apparently, Christian chaplains who actually preach Christianity. He has been reinstated. He has been reinstated. It is a small victory. He took a few minutes to sit down with the Heritage Foundation and the Daily Signal and to share some of his thoughts.
What brought me here was about a year ago, I was in private counseling sessions with a naval officer, a young Navy officer, who had asked very private questions about marriage and faith and family. And I gave a biblical response to him, and he was not happy with that response.
It seems like recently, you're not the only case like this, that there's a fine line between fulfilling your duties as a chaplain and avoiding any charges of discrimination and toe that line.
Well, when we come into the Navy, we understand that we're operating in a diverse, pluralistic environment. And that means that not everyone who comes into our office is going to necessarily agree with me theologically. But my care is not based on theological agreement. My care is based on the model Jesus Christ set. And so when Navy policy and when culture changes, as an ordained minister, I'm always obligated to follow my ordination.
If the U.S. military doesn't want anyone to mention their particular religious faith after they've recruited people to talk about religious faith, then perhaps all they really need to do is hire a bunch of psychologists. And you can go in and see the shrink. But if you're walking in and you're going to go see this chaplain who you know is an evangelical Protestant, what do you think he's going to talk about? And one of these people who complained happened to be a naval officer. I thought you had to have a few brains to actually, become an officer in the U.S. Navy. Apparently this guy figured, well, I'll go into a church, and who's this Jesus fellow you keep talking about? I'm deeply offended. Speaking of prayer and faith and religion, the Daily Signal also has this: football coach devastated after being suspended for post-game prayer. Some of you may know where this happened. Bremerton, Washington. There's a reason that God put a mountain range between the left coast and Idaho, and that was to separate us from all of the lunatics who live on the left coast. The writer says high school football coach Joe Kennedy, inspired by the Christian faith-based film Facing the Giants, walks to the 50-yard line after games to thank God for the players that he has the opportunity to coach. As of Wednesday, Kennedy has been suspended. He is no longer able to participate in the program because of his post-game prayers. Now, this gets even sillier. I'll get to that in just a moment. Kennedy's tradition started 7 years ago when he thanked God for the game and the players after coaching his first game at Bremerton High School. A few games into his private practice, students began to ask the coach what he was doing. So he didn't proselytize. He was just doing it on his own. And he said, well, I was thanking God for you guys. Facts about Coach Kennedy's post-game verbal prayers. He does not pray to a specific religion or deity. He does not say amen after the prayers. Students voluntarily congregate near Kennedy while he prays. Now, after he'd been warned and told not to do it, he went ahead and did his prayer as he usually does. And get this. The players from the other team surrounded him and got down on their knees while he prayed. The other team, the opposition. And he was still bounced, even though he had that support not only from his own players, but from the other team. Now, it doesn't end there. He's out of a job for the time being because, good golly, he talks to God. And from the liberal perspective, he's talking to some imaginary being. It's 8:18. Bill Colley with you on Top Story on News Radio 1310. KLIX and newsradio1310.com. But not to be disappointed, there will be worship at this weekend's football game at Bremerton High School. This comes from a website, GOPUSA.com. When the Bremerton Knights take the field against Sequim on Thursday, a group of Satanists dressed in ceremonial robes will be watching from the stands. The members of the Satanic Temple of Seattle, well, it is Seattle after all, I mean, what else would they have? Say they are coming to the game to advocate for religious equality in light of the controversy sparked by Bremerton High School assistant football coach Joe Kennedy, who has threatened to sue the school district if he is not allowed to pray on the field after games. You know, if he's saying a silent prayer, how would they know? Or is this all part of the thought control? When I was in school, it was fairly common. I had friends who did it because they told me they did it once in a while. Maybe they should have kept their mouth shut, and I did it too. Sometimes you would be sitting at your desk and, you wouldn't say anything to anybody, but you would say a small prayer, especially just before test time. And now you have people saying you can't do that. This is somehow wrong. I go back to the arguments about prayer in school, and I realize people say, well, then whose prayer is it going to be? Tell you what, there is a simple solution. You just finish the morning announcements over the PA system, and then you tell the students, look, we've got 2 minutes, and you can have 2 minutes of silence for meditation, or you can pray to your deity, and whomever that deity happens to be, and allow that. And then nobody is offended. And if there's an atheist in the school, the atheist can sit there and, concentrate on, I don't want to say, Om, or think about the upcoming test and how they have no one in the sky backing them up when they're taking it. I do realize he's not living in the sky, That's an artistic concept. There's some liberal out there at his keyboard right now going, he thinks there's a God in the sky. He's a typical conservative. 20 minutes after 8 o'clock. Bill Colley with you on Top Story on News Radio 1310 KLIX. More on this subject. I do recommend that if you're listening to this show, you should, sometimes I get a little loud. It might impact your hearing. You're driving down the road and all of a sudden, it's like a blowtorch coming out of your radio speakers. Could impact your hearing, so we would recommend you get your hearing checked. You can give a telephone call to Dr. Christine Pickup, a doctor of audiology. She's at Mount Harrison Audiology in Rupert, 1218 9th Street, unit number 2. Her telephone number, 208. That's the easy part, right? Everybody in Idaho, at least for a couple more years, is 208-312-0957. And you can go online at mountharrisonaudiology.com. Diabetes and hearing loss are linked. And there's, of course, an epidemic of diabetes in this country. If you or a loved one struggles with diabetes control, it could also be affecting your hearing. The inner ear is incredibly sensitive to changes in your blood supply. High blood sugars can cause hearing changes. Be sure to have your hearing screened today. Telephone number to reach our program on our politically correct subject today, 736-0300, 736-0300. And of course, you can drop me an email at bill.colley@townsquaremedia.com, last name spelled Colley. We have a caller with us. You're up next, and you're on the air.
Good morning, Bill.
Morning.
On that subject, it sounds like those students up there at Bremerton and the other team that they was playing against has the right attitudes. They have a right to have freedom of choice. And if they band together and go ahead and pray, what are they going to do? Suspend them all?
I think
Thank you.
somebody's got to stand up one of these days at one of these school board meetings and address the administration and the board members and say, hey, we don't intend to go to hell. If you want to, you can. But the rest of us, we're going to continue praying.
That's it. And the people just, they take it sitting down because of the political correctness. But if the kids aren't in school, they don't need the teachers. So that would change that aspect of it. And they could get the teachers in there that do agree.
We're really in perilous times right now, and in this case, I think that the students really need to have a say in this. And unfortunately, we're not seeing a lot of that anymore because, well, I'll share a couple more stories on this in just a couple minutes, but I want to get to our next caller. You're on the air with Bill Colley on Top Story on News Radio 1310 KLIX, as well as online at newsradio1310.com. And go ahead.
Hi. Excellent show there, Bill.
Thank you.
Did you see where Mount Hewart County in Oregon, from Oregon, and they want to join Idaho?
Yeah, there's a guy. He owns a large farm over there, and he's suggesting that all of eastern Idaho and all of eastern Oregon and Washington would likely be better off in Idaho.
That's why we call it the left coast.
Well, you know what? It's not going to happen anytime soon. About the only way that likely could happen is at the point of a gun. I mean, I'm sorry, but that's, you go back to 1861, and that's how it happened at the time. It's a long shot. I think it's a great idea, but it's a long shot.
The other thing that could make it happen would be the money. If those counties cost the state of Oregon money, maybe they'd want them to let them go or something.
I think someday that is a possibility, that especially the lefties could say, well, we don't need you any longer, and just decide to go their own direction and tell everyone else to go theirs. I'm
sure I'm proud of that coach, though. I was up to Idaho State University and watched the game, and they all gathered under the goalpost and said a prayer, too.
Uh-oh, now you let the cat out of the bag. It's going to have to come to a stop. We know that publicly now. Hey, thank you much for the telephone call. Yeah, I think the Coach Kennedy, I think he'll find another job somewhere. And he may find a job. If there's a Christian school that needs a coach, door's probably wide open. We have another caller joining us. You're up next. You're on the air with Bill Colley on Top Story on News Radio 1310 KLIX. What's on your mind?
Well, here's a little story from Washington. A nice family had owned these farms for years, and there happened to be a pond on one of them. It rains a lot over there in western Washington, and they decided to take a pasture and put in a berry patch. Berry, it didn't say exactly what kind, and now the EPA has sued them. And this is their property for $210,000.
Oh.
And then the lady, her husband passed away, and she's there dealing with it, and I don't know. But she's agreed to pay the EPA on their property where there was a pond. They took out a pasture and put in a berry patch. Now, this is criminal. This is criminal in today's America.
Well, and thank you for the call. I read a great piece today at Washington Times. A writer was saying that we've forgotten in this country. People don't even know how to assert their rights. We are sovereign. The U.S. Constitution makes the citizen sovereign. Government serves us. It's not the other way around. But you got all these people sitting around, they're just making meth, cooking up meth and watching UFC and smoking the ganja and all of that. And they don't know. As long as some government check comes in, they're happy. You're up next, and you're on the air. It's 8:27.
Yeah, good morning, Bill. The whole thing with this prayer and so forth, it was the 1962 and 63 when the Earl Warren Supreme Court ruled without any precedence prior to that they took prayer and Bible reading out of school. And, of course, this country was ruled many, many times by the Supreme Court that we're a Christian nation and that we should, be thankful for that, because our whole heritage, starting from our founding fathers and prior to that, the founding of this country, going clear back to Pilgrims, has been a hit Christian nation. And, of course, now, Christians are under attack. But it's really sad to see what's happened. The founding fathers did not want a denomination like the state church in England, the Anglican Church, but they wanted in the Northwest Ordinance, when the new states come in, they wanted religion, morality, and knowledge to be taught in schools. And now we don't hardly get any knowledge except the New World Order knowledge.
And remember, the federal government itself did not have a state religion, but the individual components, that is the states, themselves could have state religion. So Alabama, for instance, was Baptist. North Carolina even considered banning Islam way back in the 1700s. Funny that was a controversy that long ago. So this was part of our makeup.
Oh, absolutely. The states can, most of the states did have their own religion, a state religion. And if you didn't like that particular state religion, you could move someplace else. And of course, that's the whole thing now with the Islam situation. Once they come in, they want to impose their religion onto our Christian nation. And my thing is, if they don't like it here and don't like our Christian, Judeo-Christian heritage, then go back home.
Great point. Thank you much for the telephone call, sir. Coming up on 8:30. Well, I would start a GoFundMe campaign to raise the money to buy their tickets home. But I don't know that GoFundMe would allow that. See, GoFundMe, if it's run by a bunch of, leftist fellow travelers, and if it's for a cause they like, they allow it. If it's for a cause they don't like, it might offend someone. Well, I don't know. If you're fond of the donkey you left behind, I'll be glad to help you get a flight home. We've got more coming up. Hey, speaking of that, and speaking of strange habits of people, the U.S. government is fighting to allow a student who thinks, she thinks he's a he. The U.S. government is demanding that she be allowed to use the he room, if you know what I mean. Details coming up. Just spotted a quick headline. The peacenik crowd that thought Barack Obama was going to come in and light incense and everyone was going to sing Kumbaya. They're not going to like this, but it looks as if U.S. troops are going into Syria. Well, you know what happened? The Russians went in, and Mr. Obama is he's kind of put between a rock and a hard place. He doesn't want to be the guy who gave up Syria to the Russians. So all of a sudden, it's like, I think putting boots on the ground is a great idea. 41, Bill Colley with you on Top Story on News Radio 1310 KLIX and News Radio 1310.com. I want to mention something to you. A lot of people that I knew had been out in the great forest over the last few weeks doing some hunting. And many of them actually got quite lucky, and they came home with something that they need to get processed. High Desert Meat Processing processes one animal at a time, and what you bring in is what you're going to get back. Darren Van Horn, the owner of High Desert Meat Processing in Twin Falls, he's been at the job over 30 years. You can visit him, and you can visit his business on Facebook. You can read reviews of other customers. Give High Desert Meat Processing a call for all of your wild game and domestic processing needs. 734-9949. High Desert Meat does in-house smoking. Nothing gets shipped out. Specialty meats, too. Jerky, salami, summer sausage, pepperoni, breakfast sausage, kielbasa, brats, Polish dogs, hot dogs, and more. USDA approved. Darren works closely with local beef growers and their programs to ensure quality meat. The number, 734-9949. So I came across this story today. It's out of Virginia. Virginia used to be, before we actually called them red states and blue states, Virginia was actually one of the reddest states in the Union. No longer because, with the expansion of the federal government and lots of people who are beholden to a large, fat government for a paycheck, Northern Virginia, where that population center is, around Washington, has become very, very blue. Southern Virginia is a different matter. I used to do some work with a dog rescue in Ashland, Virginia. That's about 15 miles north of Richmond. And I would drive over there, and I would see the political signs during campaign seasons. And the farther you got south of, Fredericksburg, you would see a lot of Republican signs, whereas north of there, where you've got all the growth, you would see all of the liberal signs, campaign signs. And in fact, the current governor of Virginia, I'm going to tell you a little family story. Terry McAuliffe, who got that job, the Clinton family used to work for them for many, many years. Terry McAuliffe, I haven't had any dealings with him in 20 years, which is a good thing. But his first cousin, Steve Byrne, married my sister-in-law, Lisa Vanderveer, way back in 1994. So I got to meet Terry McAuliffe at a bachelor party and then got to talk with him at the wedding as well, at the reception. And he's one of those guys, when you're talking to him, he's got that look on his face. It's kind of like a mask. He thinks, he's putting one over on you, but he thinks you don't know that he's putting one over on you. I mean, it's so obvious to me that that's what the guy is like. So he's now presiding over the incredibly, well, shifting sands of Virginia politics from once being really one of the reddest states in the country now to one of the bluest before it's all said and done. This story comes out of his home state, Gloucester County, from Associated Press. Schools can't prevent transgender students from using restrooms that correspond with their gender identities without violating federal law. So says the Obama White House. Okay. The U.S. Department of Education and the Department of Justice made that argument in a friend of the court brief submitted this week in support of a Virginia teen who is suing for access to the boys' restrooms at his high school. Some of you who are, well, I don't watch it a lot. I used to see occasional shows, Saturday Night Live on NBC. Actually, Donald Trump is still going to host the program, by the way. Even liberal Eva Longoria says that Donald Trump should be allowed to host the show and people should just shut up and not watch it if they don't like him. But they used to have a character 25 years ago called Pat on Saturday Night Live, who you would see Pat and no one could figure out if Pat was a man or a woman. I saw a photograph of this kid and it's Pat. The government's filing says a Gloucester County School Board policy that requires 16-year-old Junior Gavin Grimm to use either the girls' restroom or a unisex bathroom constitutes unlawful bias under Title IX, the 1972 law that prohibits sex discrimination in education. You're going to the bathroom. It's not education, okay? And if you need an education, girls squat, boys don't. All right, that's all you need to know. And if you do one, that's you're a boy. If you do the other, you're a girl. I mean, this is not brain surgery, folks. 8:37. Bill Colley with you this morning. On top story on News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com. Listen to this. The brief quote sends a crucial message to schools across the country. Transgender youth are valuable members of our community who are entitled to full protection of the law, unquote. See, because it might hurt his feelings, or her feelings, or its feelings, if it had to use the unisex bathroom. One of these days, there is going to be some horrible story that will be dealt to us where someone is raped and tortured and killed in one of these restrooms, and then the liberals will all say, well, no, that happened, your feelings. 8:37. You're on the air on News Radio 1310 KLIX, and what's on your mind?
I just noticed yesterday, Bill, that Idaho still has a constitution and it still has borders. What we need in Idaho, a lot of these problems you're talking about, is full registration with the Secretary of State of any UN program being implemented in the state of Idaho. And that could be vetted through the Attorney General's office. And then if they implement any of these programs, Agenda 21 programs, they should have to pay a huge permit fee, like $5,000. Then Idaho will find out what's really going on with UN intervention in Idaho.
Well, yeah, thank you much for the call. And you got people out there who keep trying to give Idaho away. Had a conversation yesterday with a potential challenger to Congressman Mike Simpson, and we got to chatting about the big 500,000 acre giveaway of a land that will prevent it from being developed and used. Already, as the federal government runs two-thirds or has control over two-thirds of the state, it just seems ridiculous that we would allow this to happen. And yet, it goes on, and you've got people just saying, well, trust us. We know better. Speaking of politically correct, and then we'll move on to some other topic. In fact, I'm going to talk a little bit about government and how government double talks in a few minutes. I came across this also at the Daily Signal today, a writer by the name of Mike Gonzalez, and he's criticizing a San Francisco middle school. You may have heard about this already. It canceled the student government election because too many white students won. And then the school defended its policy, saying that the student's choice, according to the principal, was, quote, I want to make sure the voices are all heard, unquote. Well, you had an election. The voices were heard. Yeah, but gee willikers, Daquan and Esteban over here are going to have their feelings hurt because they didn't get elected. Well, give them a trophy. Give everybody a trophy. Tell them they're all special, and then just send them home. 20 minutes away from 10 o'clock. Bill Colley with you on Top Story. News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com. Cruz and Rand Paul team up once more.